Hi, I'm Melantha. My family once told me I cared too much, so they cropped me out of photos, uninvited me from my own engagement party, and called a pastor to diagnose me for kindness. But the final blow? They erased the one person I shared coffee with every morning, then told me he didn't belong at my wedding. I almost believed them, until 12 Marines in full uniform walked through the chapel doors, and the whole room finally saw who the real outsider was. Before we dive in, what time are you listening, and where from? Drop it in the comments below. I read everyone. Because this story? It's not just about a scarf and a bench. It's about what happens when quiet love refuses to be silenced. They say kindness is weakness, but maybe they've never stood in the cold at 5:30 in the morning, holding a paper cup that shakes in their hands, not because of the caffeine, but because their fingers can't seem to warm up anymore. That's when I started noticing him, sitting there on the bench across from the old laundromat, same bench every day, like it was his shift to keep watch over a world that had forgotten him. He never begged, never asked for anything, just sat, quiet, still, like the cold didn't touch him, or maybe like it touched him so often it no longer mattered. It became routine, not out of pity, out of something else. Recognition, maybe. I'd wrap a croissant, still warm from the oven, pour a black coffee into a to-go cup, and slip out the back of the bakery before the city woke up. I left it on the bench beside him without a word, just a small folded napkin with a note. Wishing you a peaceful day. He never said thank you. He just nodded. That was enough. This morning, the wind bit through my coat. My scarf, a thick gray wool one my father gave me years ago, had seen better days, but it still held warmth. As I placed the coffee and pastry on the bench, I hesitated, then unwrapped the scarf from my neck and laid it beside the cup. His shoulders looked tenser than usual. His hands had trembled the day before. And really, what was I holding onto a scarf for, if not this? Inside the bakery, the air smelled of cinnamon and yeast, but it couldn't mask the bitterness that had started to brew among the staff. I wasn't part of my family's bakery anymore. Callista and Mom had made that clear when they brought in consultants and turned our century-old bakery into a brunch-forward lifestyle experience. Their words, not mine. At my new job, people were polite, but not kind. I heard it when they thought I couldn't. She thinks she's Mother Teresa, one of the part-timers said to another last week, laughing over powdered sugar. She probably thinks that guy's going to get up and thank her in his Oscar speech one day. I kept rolling dough. A few days later, my sister texted me out of nowhere. Callista, you're embarrassing us. Not everything needs to be some kind of savior complex, Mel. That same evening, I noticed I couldn't access the family group chat anymore. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. My cousin, the one who sends cheesy memes at 2 a.m., still in it. My uncle who lives in Oregon and hasn't been back in a decade, still in it. Me? Just quietly deleted. And that's when it hit me. Not just the chat, the message behind it. I wasn't just the weird one anymore. I was no longer part of us. I didn't say anything, didn't respond to Callista, didn't ask why. Instead, I started setting my alarm 15 minutes earlier. I avoided anyone seeing me leave the back door, made sure the pastries I gave were from my own batch, paid out of pocket, because what they didn't understand was that this wasn't about charity. It wasn't about feeling good or being good. It was about dignity, his and mine. He never asked for anything, never even spoke. But I saw him. I remember the first morning I began. It was after one of those family meetings where I was told I lacked vision, lacked presence, lacked everything they wanted the vain legacy to represent. I walked home that night past the laundromat and saw him there, hunched, shivering, staring at the ground. Something inside me clenched, not in pity, recognition. I knew what it was like to be passed over, to be told you don't belong, even when your fingerprints are all over the foundation. He didn't need saving. He just needed seeing. Last weekend, my cousin posted a photo from a family brunch I never knew happened. The caption said, Vane brunch, always stronger together. They had it at Harbor House, the spot I used to reserve every Mother's Day. Everyone was smiling, even the uncle who once told me I made the best raspberry tart he'd ever had. No one seemed to notice I wasn't there. Or maybe they did, and didn't care. That photo told me more than any text message ever could. I wasn't included because I didn't fit the image anymore. I wasn't silent or moldable or useful in the way they wanted. Feeding a man on a bench didn't align with their brand, so I doubled down. Every day I got up a little earlier, wrapped the food tighter, wrote the notes in my best handwriting, and this morning I left the scarf. The cold stung my face on the walk back, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone out there was warmer because of me. The next day I returned to the bench like always, but the scarf was gone. The coffee cup was there, empty, clean, and gently set back down with care. No napkin, no reply, just the space where something had been. But what I found tucked under that cup made me stop breathing. It was just a napkin, a plain, white square folded once with deliberate care. On it, written in blocky pencil strokes. The scarf saved me that night. I thought I had no worth left. Thank you for not letting the world erase me too. I stood there for a long time, napkin in one hand, coffee cup in the other, while Charleston's morning chill gnawed through my sleeves. The sound of buses and the occasional honk faded into the background. All I could hear was that last sentence repeating in my mind like a bell. Thank you for not letting the world erase me too. Erased. That word landed like a stone in my chest. It wasn't dramatic. It was accurate. That's exactly what it had felt like, being slowly deleted from the version of my family that they wanted to preserve. A cleaner one, easier to explain, no edges, no complications. Back in my apartment, I placed the napkin on the kitchen counter like it was something sacred. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there, coat still on, scarf missing, and reached for my phone. I hadn't opened Leora's page in months, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me there. She posted everything, from latte art to family updates, and right there, buried between a post about her yoga retreat and her dog's birthday, was the photo. Callista's wedding, a full year ago. Everyone was in it. My mother in her navy dress, standing like royalty. Uncle Jude with his hand on Aunt Vera's shoulder. Callista and her husband at the center, glowing. Even distant relatives who never came to Christmas were there. I remembered that moment. I had stood right behind Leora. I remembered the click, the way I had tilted slightly to the left so I wouldn't block anyone. But in the version posted, I wasn't there. I looked again, cropped, cleanly, like a scissor through a face in a yearbook. I dragged my fingers across the screen, searching for any sliver of my sleeve, my hair, anything. Nothing. Just a blur of the pillar I had been seated behind during the reception. The comments stung more than I expected. Such a beautiful family. Everyone's here. This should be framed. The Vanes are always picture perfect. They were right. Everyone was there, except the one they decided didn't belong. I closed the app, but it didn't stop the memory from flooding in. I had worn a dark green dress that day. Simple, modest, not flashy enough for Callista's taste, I'm sure. I didn't mind sitting near the speakers until the server came by and asked, "Are you with catering?" He wasn't trying to be cruel. I just didn't match the rest of the tables, not with my dress or my quiet presence. He looked embarrassed when I shook my head. "No, I'm... family." He nodded quickly, moved on, never looked back. No one really did that night. They let me sit in the corner behind the pillar like I was part of the scenery. I raised a glass when they toasted to Callista's new life, smiled politely, even clapped when her husband's frat brothers did that awful choreographed dance. But no one came to my table. Not once, and then came the moment. Uncle Jude leaned toward a family friend I didn't know, motioned toward me with a chuckle and said loud enough for several people to hear, "That's Callista's little sister. She gives muffins to a bum every morning. Thinks she's making a difference." Laughter rippled across the table. "And my mother?" She didn't laugh, but she didn't stop them either. She simply took another bite of cake, eyes fixed on her plate like nothing had happened. That laugh has stayed with me longer than it had any right to. It was the sound of casual dismissal. Not cruel, not cutting, just dismissive. Like I was amusing and irrelevant. Like my life didn't count. I don't even remember the rest of the evening, just the numbness, just the slow realization that I was only still invited out of politeness, and even that, it seemed, had worn thin. In the weeks that followed, I printed the photo Leora posted. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me thought if I kept it long enough, someone would remember that I was there, that I had stood there with my hands clasped in front of me, hoping, like a child, not to be in the way. But today, looking at it with fresh eyes, I saw it for what it was, a clean cut, a symbolic decision. They didn't just forget me, they didn't want me there. And that, more than the mocking, more than the text messages, more than the group chat removal, that was what hurt most. Mocking me was easier than admitting they never tried to understand me. Erasing me was cleaner than accepting a daughter who didn't play the part they'd written for her. I walked back to the bench that same afternoon. The napkin note still sat folded in my coat pocket. I pressed it between the pages of an old book I kept by the nightstand just to protect it. The next morning, I stepped out early again with a fresh croissant and coffee. Frost clung to the corners of the bench, but I placed everything down gently, just like always. I hesitated, then took out a small note card of my own and wrote only 3 words. You are seen. I didn't sign it. When I turned to leave, I glanced back once, just long enough to know that even if they had tried to erase me, I wasn't invisible. Not to everyone. I should have walked away from the family then, but sometimes love makes you swallow poison with a smile, and in that moment, standing by the kitchen counter, that folded napkin still in my pocket, I swallowed every bitter drop of it, still holding on to something I knew was already gone. Later that evening, I pulled out an old shoebox from the top of my closet. It held all the almosts and maybe next times I hadn't dared to throw away. Cards, faded Polaroids, a chipped ceramic heart my sister Callista gave me when we were 12. Somewhere beneath it all, a photo of Gideon and me on the day we got engaged. It was a warm April afternoon. The light had caught just right on his eyelashes when he knelt down in front of the firehouse. I said yes before he even finished asking. We decided on a simple engagement celebration, nothing extravagant. Just a few tables at Café Delilah near Colonial Lake. I'd made the napkin rings myself with twine and tiny pressed flowers. Callista always said my crafts were quaint, like I was born in the wrong century. I'd sent out invitations 3 weeks in advance. One for my mother, one for each of my siblings, a few cousins. Just family. Just love. No one came. That day, I wore a navy blue wrap dress and polished earrings I'd inherited from my grandmother. Gideon's crew showed up, all smiles and applause. But the 2 long tables I'd saved for my side of the family sat untouched. Maybe they hit traffic, Gideon whispered after the first hour, still hopeful. His hand had brushed mine under the table. Your mom's always late, right? But deep down, I knew. Late wasn't the problem. Never intending to come was. By dessert, the manager approached with a kind expression and offered, "Would you like me to consolidate the tables, ma'am? We could make the room feel a little cozier." I nodded without looking up, cheeks stinging. I'd told myself I wasn't going to cry. Not today, not over them. Still, I slipped into the restroom after the cake was served, just long enough to pull myself back together. I stared into the mirror and told myself, "This is your day. You are not invisible here." But I couldn't ignore the image of those empty chairs, decorated and waiting like ghosts. In the present, I folded the photo of that celebration back into the shoebox. Just then, the metallic thump of the mail slot echoed through the apartment. I padded to the front door and picked up the envelopes scattered on the floor. Junk, utility bill, charity newsletter, and then something else. An envelope, off-white, torn at the corners, water-stained. The flap looked like it had been ripped open, then taped back together. My handwriting stared back at me from the front. It was the wedding invitation I'd sent to my mother. Returned, Unopened, scribbled across the front, in a messy scrawl I didn't recognize, were 5 words. Recipient declined. No interest. Return. I stood frozen. It wasn't just about the envelope. It was a message. Intentional, cruel in its bluntness. No interest. Not in me. Not in my future. Not in Gideon. Not in anything that didn't circle around their perfect picture. I held it for a long time, my fingertips turning numb. People always talk about breaking points like they're loud, shouting matches, slammed doors, angry exits, but sometimes they're silent. Sometimes they arrive in your mailbox, folded in half, smelling like mildew and shame. Later that night, I sat at the window with the invitation resting in my lap. Outside, the lamplight cast quiet shadows across the sidewalk, flickering like doubt. Gideon came home late from his shift. He kicked off his boots at the door, kissed my cheek, and noticed my silence. His eyes drifted to the envelope in my lap. He didn't ask. He just sat beside me, let the quiet wrap around us for a moment before I finally said, "I think it's time we stop hoping they'll come around." He nodded. "I know. I keep trying to earn something they're never going to give," I whispered. "Approval, maybe, or just basic love." "You shouldn't have to earn it," he said. His fingers curled around mine, warm and solid. "That's not love." I leaned into him, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I needed to explain myself. I didn't need to perform. I could just be. The next morning, I placed the envelope in the trash, not with bitterness, but finality. I didn't need to keep proof of rejection anymore. I had enough memories of it. But even poison has a taste, and that morning it came with a warning from my manager. It was barely 7. I'd just finished wiping down the glass counter and stacking trays of almond croissants when Brian motioned me toward the back, away from the other staff. He didn't say much at first, just pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Is this you?" he asked. I recognized the bench, my gray coat, the paper cup, the croissant bag carefully folded and placed beside it. "Someone sent this to corporate," he added, trying for a tone that sounded more managerial than accusatory. "Apparently a customer found it concerning, said it made them feel unsafe." "Unsafe?" I blinked. "Yeah. The implication is that folks might start gathering near the property if word spreads." I didn't reply. My jaw clenched, but I waited for the rest. "There's a new policy, no unauthorized interactions outside company premises, especially with, people experiencing homelessness." I swallowed hard. I didn't leave it on the bakery property. "Doesn't matter," he said, fidgeting with his wedding band. "You're wearing your apron in the picture, you represent the brand." "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my heart was racing. Brian sighed. "I like you, Mel. You're reliable, you show up early, you work hard, but you've got to stop this or I'll have to write you up. One more report, and corporate will probably push for termination." He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted me to thank him for the warning. I just nodded and walked back to the front. The croissants had cooled. The coffee urn hissed behind me, but my hands trembled as I tied the ribbon around the next pastry bag. It was like being scolded for holding the door open too long, for making eye contact, for seeing someone no one else wanted to. That night after Gideon got off shift, I didn't tell him about Brian. Not yet. Instead, I made tea, sat across from him at the kitchen table, and let my mind drift, back to a different moment of being invisible but inconvenient. Callista's bridal shower. She had invited me, rare, considering I was usually forgotten during things that were important to her. I had been surprised, almost flattered. I even baked a batch of lemon lavender cookies from scratch, arranged them on a porcelain tray, and arrived early. The event was held at a trendy event space inside a Charleston boutique hotel. White walls, golden balloons, classical piano piped through the ceiling. I checked in with the hostess and handed over my gift. When I asked where I was seated, she glanced at the clipboard, then frowned. "I don't see your name here, but we do have an extra chair at table 5, by the restrooms," she added quickly, pointing to a folding chair tucked behind a large support column. I sat there, the tray of cookies in my lap like a shield. No one said hello. No one introduced themselves. The women at table 5 chatted about destination weddings and hairstylists. One of them glanced at me and asked if I could bring more water. I smiled, and I got her water. Callista gave a speech halfway through. Every woman in this room has made me feel more loved, more radiant, and more confident as I enter this new chapter, she said, her voice glossy and performative. I was 5 feet from her. She never once looked in my direction. That memory slid back into place as I stared down at my tea. I hadn't brought it up to anyone, not even Gideon. Not worth the fight, I'd told myself. But it stayed with me, just like the look Brian gave me this morning. The way he tried to make policy sound like concern, like keeping kindness professional somehow made it acceptable. The next morning, I walked my usual route toward the bench by the bus stop. The wind had picked up. My cheeks stung. I held the bagged croissant close to my chest, the paper cup warm in my gloved hand. When I reached the bench, I sat down beside it this time. No scarf, no note. Just me and the quiet. I placed the meal gently on the wood and whispered, "They want me to stop seeing you. I won't." I didn't know if he was watching. I never looked, but I hoped he heard it. So that night, Gideon was folding laundry when he spoke. "Hey," he said gently, "you're not in trouble or anything, are you?" I paused at the sink. "Why?" "You've been tighter than usual, distant. Is everything okay at the bakery?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "They warned me today, told me if I keep leaving food out, I could get fired." He nodded slowly. "Do you want to keep doing it?" "I need to," I said. "It's not just about him, it's about me too. I can't be part of a world that punishes compassion." "I get it," he said. "But can I ask one thing?" "Sure. How far are you willing to go for this? And what's the cost?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because the cost was already being paid, day by day, through the quiet rejection of the people who were supposed to love me first. I set my alarm earlier that night. At 4:30 the next morning, I tied my laces in the dark, slipped on my coat, and stepped outside, still carrying the coffee, still carrying the croissant. Because kindness may be punished, but it never makes me feel small. I thought that was the worst they could do, until they told me I needed therapy. For compassion. The envelope arrived 3 days after the meeting with my manager. I was still wiping the residual anger off my days, still setting my alarm earlier, still handing over warmth in the form of a croissant and a cup of black coffee. But when I opened the mailbox and saw the script of my mother's handwriting on thick stationery, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't her usual script. This was stiffer, as if she'd taken the time to make each curve deliberate. Inside was a formal dinner invitation. My name in bold, Gideon's too. "We'd like to have you for supper, just a small gathering, family only." I stared at it long enough for the winter chill to creep through my coat sleeves. That evening, Gideon read it aloud again as he set his coffee down. "Maybe they're trying to mend things," he said, hopeful. "It might be awkward, sure, but maybe it's a step." I wanted to believe that. And for the first hour of preparing, brushing my hair, ironing my coat, I let myself pretend it was true. We drove in silence. The sky dimmed to gray as we turned onto the familiar street, my childhood street, the one where I used to ride my bike with untied shoelaces and dirt on my knees, but now every brick of that house made my spine tighten. Isolde opened the door before we knocked. "Melantha, Gideon, come in." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were too alert, as if she were watching a performance about to begin. Inside, the house was spotless. Too spotless. The kind of clean that made you afraid to breathe wrong. The dining table was empty, except for a pitcher of lemon water and 4 glasses. Callista sat on the couch, legs crossed, phone face down on her lap. Across from her sat Pastor Milton from our old congregation, retired years ago, now invited to dinner. Something was wrong. "Have a seat," Isolde said, gesturing to the living room. I hesitated, but Gideon gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. Pastor Milton opened the conversation like it was a prayer circle. "We're gathered here because we love you, Melantha. Deeply." I tilted my head slightly. "This isn't a dinner." Callista interjected, "We thought this would be easier in a more familiar setting." My mother picked up a manila folder and placed it in her lap. "We've been watching. Not in a judgmental way, but in a concerned one. Your recent behavior, this obsession with helping strangers, detaching from family gatherings, placing yourself in potentially unsafe situations, it's raised some red flags." My eyes darted to Gideon, but his gaze was fixed on the floor. "You're isolating yourself," Callista said. "Feeding some man in the cold every day, refusing to engage in healthy boundaries." "Boundaries?" I asked. "You mean like the ones you all drew around yourselves and called family?" The pastor cleared his throat. "It's not that what you're doing is wrong per se, but we worry you're over-identifying with displaced individuals, that you've adopted a sort of martyr complex." A martyr complex. I actually laughed. It caught in my throat, bitter and sharp. "You think kindness is pathology?" I asked. Isolde leaned forward. "We think it's gone too far, and before you make any life-altering decisions, like a marriage, we think it's time for therapy. And Gideon," she added carefully, "you may want to consider delaying things, just until Melantha has a clearer head." I turned my whole body to look at him, his lips parted like he might speak, but nothing came out. And then my mother said, "We already spoke to your parents. They're worried too." That was the knife. I stood. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, measured. My voice came out lower than I expected, but clearer than ever. "You all built a room to contain me. I walked in thinking it was a table." Callista shifted in her seat, suddenly less poised. I turned to her. "If you ever try to sabotage this marriage again, you'll learn how quiet people fight." Then I turned to Gideon. He stood too, this time more quickly, but the silence between us was louder than any words. We left without saying goodbye. That night the apartment felt smaller. I couldn't eat, couldn't sit. I paced for 20 minutes, then finally settled by the window, pen in hand, a blank sheet of paper on my lap. I wrote it like I imagined Victor would write it, if he could. "You don't owe them understanding when they call your kindness a disease." I folded the paper once, slid it into the pocket of my coat. Sometimes you write things not to send them, but to remind yourself what you know to be true. But I wasn't the only target. A week later, his name vanished from the guest list. The morning started like any other. The scent of cinnamon filled the bakery, the kind that reminded people of home even when home had long stopped feeling like a safe place. I stood behind the counter, helping fold menus while Gideon rinsed his travel mug at the back sink. Later that afternoon, we had a scheduled walkthrough at the venue, one of those checklists you assume will be easy. Flowers, chairs, plates, names, just names. That's all it was supposed to be. Melis, the venue coordinator, greeted us with her usual clipboard smile. She led us into the banquet room where white linens stretched across long tables, and place card samples stood like silent guards. "We made those seating adjustments from the email your sister sent," she said as we approached the head table mock-up. "So table 4 looks different now." I blinked. "What email?" "Oh," Melis replied, scanning her sheet. "She said she was helping finalize guests. Figured she was authorized." I took a slow step forward and studied the printed list beside the centerpiece. Table 4. Our table for those who never demanded attention, the ones who showed up early and left last. Victor's name was gone. It wasn't misspelled. It wasn't moved. It was erased. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the original printed guest chart I'd handwritten and triple-checked. I placed it flat on the table. "No one changes this list but me," I said. Melis flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "I know," I said, folding the paper slowly. "But it matters." We finished the walkthrough, but the room felt different, like something sacred had been tampered with. The next morning, I woke up an hour earlier. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me refused to rest. I packed Victor's breakfast, a banana muffin, a wrapped croissant, and a steaming cup of strong coffee, and walked toward the bench. He wasn't there. It wasn't unusual for him to leave early, but the stillness felt off. 2 days later, I found him. It was early Saturday, just after sunrise. The park was quiet except for a mother pushing a stroller, a toddler bouncing alongside. I was walking toward the bench when I heard raised voices. "Don't come near us," the mother barked. Victor stood frozen by a nearby trash can, holding a half-folded napkin in one hand, the coffee cup now empty in the other. His body tensed, but he said nothing. "You were watching my daughter. I saw you. I'll call the cops," she snapped, pulling her phone from her coat. I rushed forward, heart pounding. "Ma'am," I said, trying to sound measured, "he wasn't watching anyone. He's here every morning. I don't care," she cut me off. "Freaks like him shouldn't be near playgrounds." She stormed off, dragging her child by the wrist, muttering something under her breath. Victor didn't look at me. He just wiped the bench with the napkin and walked away, hunched like someone who'd spent too many years apologizing just for existing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat on the same bench, my hands still holding his untouched breakfast. I stayed there until the coffee turned cold. That night, I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, a pile of torn seating charts beside me. I wasn't angry, not in the loud way, but something in me had snapped. Not broken, just shifted. Gideon walked in quietly. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me smooth out a wrinkled name tag with Victor's name still printed in my handwriting. "They want him gone," I said, not looking up. "Like he's an inconvenience, like kindness is something that stains linen." He didn't say anything, just walked over and sat beside me. I folded the card gently and slid it into my journal. "If they want him gone," I whispered, "then they'll have to erase me too." They tried to bury him in silence, so I made sure the world would hear his name. The voicemail came just as I was tying my apron. A short vibration in my coat pocket, followed by Victor's voice, low and shaken. "They called the cops on me. I wasn't doing anything, just sitting." That was it, just those words. I dropped the apron, grabbed my keys, and headed straight for the bench. But when I got there, the cup was cold and untouched. Victor was gone. No note, no sign, just the folded edge of yesterday's napkin stuck under the bench slat, trembling in the wind. The rehearsal was scheduled for 2 AM. I barely made it on time. The church looked like it had been plucked out of a bridal magazine, polished pews, hydrangeas trimmed with lace, hymnals replaced with printed programs. But it all felt false, like a backdrop for a family that only existed on paper. Melis, the wedding coordinator, met me at the side entrance. She smiled, but her eyes flickered too fast. "Can I talk to you a moment?" she said, guiding me into the empty choir loft. I nodded. She hesitated, then exhaled. "Your mother approached me earlier this week." Of course she did. "She expressed concern about a man you've been seen with, someone who might make guests uncomfortable if he appeared at the ceremony." I didn't flinch. "Victor." "She asked that we have someone on site to prevent him from entering," Melis continued, "and she also asked that his name be removed from any printed materials." "Did you agree to that?" I asked quietly. She looked down at her clipboard. "Technically, your mother was listed as the booking party for the venue, so yes, I had to honor it." I looked out over the empty pews. Every seat lined up in order, every flower centered. It was pristine. It was perfect. It was not mine. I turned back to her with a smile. "Thank you for telling me." She seemed relieved, like she expected a tantrum. But I'd stopped yelling years ago. That night, I opened the cedar box at the back of my closet. Inside were things most people would call trash. The first napkin note Victor ever wrote, a copy of the returned wedding invitation, a scrap of scarf fabric, fraying at the edges, and the original guest list, with his name, bold and underlined, Victor H. I placed them one by one on the table. Artifacts of erasure, and then I made a call. Gideon had mentioned once, almost offhandedly, that a fellow firefighter had served with the Marines, that he still kept in touch with his old unit. I remembered the way Gideon had smiled when he said, "They show up when it counts. No noise, just boots and honor." I told him, "Ask if they'd be willing to attend a wedding, in uniform." He didn't ask why. He just said, "Give me an hour." While he was on the phone, I packed the scarf into a small gift box. I added the folded guest list. I tucked in Victor's note, written in scratchy black pen. "You see me. That's enough." I added one last card, blank on the front. Inside I wrote, "This wedding isn't just for me. It's for everyone you tried to disappear." I sealed it shut with wax and pressed my father's old cufflink into the soft red circle. The imprint stayed. A tiny cross. One he'd worn every Sunday and never once offered to me. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not even when I saw the look in Gideon's eyes after his call ended and he said, "They'll be there." The next morning I stood in front of the church again. Same white steps, same blue sky pretending it had nothing to hide. People inside were arranging flowers. My mother was already seated in the front row. Victor wasn't there. Not yet. But I was. He stood outside the church, unsure if he should come in, until I opened the doors for both of us. The light from the stained glass windows spilled across the marble floor in fractured colors, casting a rainbow across Victor's shoes as he hesitated on the top step. He wore a worn navy suit, one I suspected he had saved for years. The sleeves were a touch too short, his tie slightly askew, but his shoes were polished. In his chest pocket, neatly folded, was the gray scarf. I didn't need to see the whole thing. The edge, frayed just slightly, peeked out like a flag. I had watched him arrive from the small bridal room above. I saw the hesitation in his shoulders, the stiffness of a man bracing for rejection, and then I saw the volunteer step into his path. "Sir, I'm sorry. You're not on the list." Victor nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for anything. He turned. That's when I stood up. I didn't think. I just moved, grabbed the hem of my dress with both hands, and made my way down the side steps. The wedding hadn't even started. Music still hung faint in the background. My hair hadn't been pinned yet. My mother was somewhere in the front row, probably checking her watch. I didn't care. My heels clicked sharply against the tile as I reached the side doors and pulled them open. Victor froze when he saw me. His eyes widened, not in fear but in disbelief, like maybe I was a vision he didn't expect. "I wasn't going to cause trouble," he said quietly. "I know," I answered. "But they were." I reached for his hand. He hesitated just a second, then gave it to me. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary as I stepped inside, arm in arm with the man who wasn't supposed to exist. My mother turned her head sharply, her face locked in place. Callista's lips parted, but no sound came out. One of the bridesmaids actually dropped her program. I didn't stop. We walked halfway up the aisle when the heavy wooden church doors creaked open behind us. 12 men stepped inside in unison. Their boots met the tile in perfect formation, each one in full marine dress. Not one word spoken. The church fell silent, save for the crisp cadence of their approach. At the front, the lead Marine stepped forward. His voice was clear, measured. "We are here today," he said, "to honor the woman who, through nothing more than bread and dignity, helped preserve one of our own." Victor stiffened. His hand trembled in mine. The Marine turned toward the pews. "This man is Sergeant Victor Hale, decorated in Fallujah, lost his family to a drunk driver, disappeared from public life 10 years ago. Some called him missing, others assumed he was lost." He looked at me then. But she, Melantha Quinn, called him human. I didn't notice I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. The Marine saluted Victor, then turned and saluted me. Behind him, each man followed in sequence. 12 salutes. 12 acknowledgments of a man who'd been silenced by the world, and the woman who had noticed him every morning. Victor couldn't speak. His jaw flexed and his eyes glistened. Melis, the wedding planner, stood frozen at the side. She had no clipboard now, no instructions left. Gideon walked forward. He shook Victor's hand like they'd known each other forever. "If she'll have you," Gideon said, voice steady. I'd be honored if you walked her down the aisle." Victor didn't answer right away. He looked at me, waiting. I smiled through the tears. "Yes, please." He offered me his arm, a little unsure. I took it. We walked past the first row. My mother didn't move. Her knuckles were white against her clutch. Callista stared down at the hem of her dress like she could disappear into it. A bridesmaid near the back whispered, not to me but to herself. "We mocked her, and she saved a life." I didn't turn. At the altar, Gideon stood waiting. No judgment. Just open palms and the same quiet faith he had always shown me. Victor placed my hand in Gideon's and stepped back. But before he did, he reached for the scarf in his pocket. He smoothed it flat, and then he folded it into a perfect square and tucked it into the pocket of my dress, right over my heart. No one apologized, but when I opened the quiet table, the line never stopped forming. 6 months had passed. The spring chill had softened into the quiet warmth of early fall. The air smelled of dew-soaked leaves and rising bread. I still woke up before dawn, still packed croissants into brown paper sleeves with careful hands. But now, I wasn't walking down alleys or slipping away through side doors. Now I had a place. We called it the Quiet Table. It was tucked beneath a low-hanging oak on the edge of Battery Park. A long, handmade bench stretched beside it. Gideon had built the structure himself, simple, sturdy, painted a calming slate blue. At the head of the table was a wooden post with a small framed glass case. Inside was the scarf. The same gray scarf I left on that bench so long ago, folded perfectly, resting on soft white linen. Below it, a brass plate read, "To those the world tries to forget." Some mornings no one said a word. And that was the point. No questions, no forms, no proof of need, just food, hot coffee, a place to sit that didn't come with pity or shame. I still didn't know where Victor had gone. He disappeared shortly after the wedding. No long goodbye, just a folded napkin left on the table that read, "You gave me my name back." At first I thought it was a goodbye. Then the postcards started coming. One from Santa Fe, another from Kansas City. Most had no return address. Just simple hand-drawn breakfasts, a plate, a mug, a window. He always signed the same way. "Every breakfast is a salute. V." The last one I got came from a VA center in Washington State. I had never even mentioned the center to him, but Captain Duncan later confirmed Victor had finally enrolled for benefits. He was in trauma therapy, even speaking at outreach groups for other veterans. He never asked for recognition, so I honored him the only way I knew how, by never stopping. Callista and my mother never reached out again. Not a word. Not even after the wedding. One afternoon, while picking up donated produce, I saw a flyer for a charity gala at a luxury hotel downtown. The honorees? Advocates for Veterans' Mental Health. My mother's name was listed as a board patron, Callista as a guest speaker. My name? Absent. I didn't feel rage, just tired. They had always been good at speaking over people, even when those people were saving lives quietly. I folded the flyer and threw it away without a second thought. I had onions to chop and tables to wipe down. That silence, theirs, didn't hurt the same anymore. On the 1-year anniversary of the wedding, I opened the site just a little earlier than usual. Gideon stood beside me, a bouquet of white wildflowers in his arms. He kissed my cheek and stepped back when he saw the line that had already begun to form. Then, from the corner of the lot, they came. 12 men. This time in jeans, polos, and flannel. Normal clothes. But they still moved with the same deliberate cadence. The 12 Marines. Captain Duncan approached first. He didn't salute, just placed a single sunflower beneath the case that held Victor's scarf. One by one, the others followed. Each flower different, wild, messy, beautiful. They didn't speak right away. Then Duncan turned to me. "This honor? It's not yours alone anymore," he said quietly. "It belongs to everyone you reminded the world to see." For the first time, I didn't cry. I smiled. The line for breakfast never stopped forming that morning. It curved past the benches and into the sidewalk. Some faces I knew, others I didn't. A few were rough around the edges, some wore ties. One man came in a wheelchair, a woman carried a sleeping toddler on her back. Nobody asked who deserved what. They just came, and I just kept serving. Sometimes I still think about how it all started, how a single act, one scarf, one cup of coffee, wasn't about saving anyone. It was about refusing to look away. They tried to humiliate me for feeding a man they didn't know, I whisper now to myself as I wipe down the final tray. But when 12 Marines stood in silence, the truth didn't need defending. I wasn't just feeding him. I was saving myself too. Because sometimes the person who needs to be seen is you.